What happens when a nearly 70-year-old mother who spent her entire life building a home and a legacy discovers that her own daughter and son-in-law have been quietly poisoning her to take it all? When the memory problems weren't aging at all, but a carefully staged plan to declare her incompetent and seize everything she worked for. They say, trust is earned, not given. But when betrayal comes from your own blood, do you keep protecting the family name, or do you fight to protect your own life? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. What happens when a nearly 70-year-old mother who spent her entire life building a home and a legacy realizes that the very walls she restored with her own hands may now be closing in on her? My name is Asmara Quinn Holloway. I am 69 years old, a retired structural engineer, and until recently I believed I understood foundations better than most people understand their own families. For 3 decades, I rebuilt the historic house on Trad Street in Charleston beam by beam, permit by permit, calculation by calculation. It is a 4-story antebellum home with hand-carved banisters, original heart pine floors, and a view of the harbor that glows gold at sunset. Developers have been circling this neighborhood for years, buying up properties and flipping them into polished investments. Mine was worth several $million. I never intended to sell. I intended to leave it to my daughter. Allow and move back in with her husband Gavin Mercer after his investment firm ran into what he described as temporary liquidity issues. I welcomed them. I told myself family's close ranks when times get hard. I gave them the entire 3rd floor and access to my kitchen. I even rearranged my workshop so Gavin could use it as an office. The first sign something was wrong was my hands. They began to tremble, not violently, just enough to make pouring coffee feel unfamiliar. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, sleepless nights where my heart thudded so loudly against my ribs it felt like a warning drum. I blamed age. I blamed stress. Then my reading glasses appeared in the refrigerator. I stood there staring at them beside a carton of eggs, certain I would never have placed them there. A week later, my wallet turned up in the downstairs bathroom drawer beneath spare towels. My heart medication vanished from my bedside table and reappeared inside a cereal box. The thermostat was set to 58 degrees in the middle of a humid Charleston summer, and I woke up shivering under 2 blankets. Each time Gavin would appear concerned, calm, helpful. "Memory slips happen, Asmara," he would say gently. "It's nothing to be ashamed of." He brought a doctor to the house, someone he played golf with apparently. The man spoke slowly, using that tone reserved for fragile patients. He asked me to recall 3 words. He asked what day it was. He asked if I ever misplaced objects. When he left, he suggested I might be experiencing early cognitive decline. A change of scenery, a long-term wellness retreat, perhaps somewhere dry and peaceful like Sedona, Arizona might help. I began to doubt myself. But I am an engineer. I document anomalies. I track patterns. I started keeping notes, times, dates, temperatures, what I ate, who was in the room when things went missing. The pattern emerged quietly. Every incident occurred when I had been alone with Gavin or shortly after Elowen stepped out. Never when I had visitors. Never when Mrs. Delphine from next door dropped by with her lemon cake. Then I noticed something else. Behind the framed photograph of the Ravenel Bridge in my study, my favorite image from a project I once consulted on, sat a wall safe. I checked it out of habit one afternoon and ran my finger along the edge. There was a fine crescent of metal shavings near the hinge. A faint drill mark, not deep enough to breach it, but deliberate. Someone had tried. That night, as I passed through the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Gavin's phone lighting up on the kitchen counter. I would not have looked if the screen hadn't flashed at the exact moment I turned. "Make sure she signs before Friday." The message disappeared before I could read more. The next morning, Gavin placed an envelope in front of me at the breakfast table, a one-way ticket to Sedona. "Departure in 48 hours. It's just until you're feeling stronger," he said. "A chance to rest." Alawan avoided my eyes. I studied the ticket. One way. I nodded slowly as if resigned, as if grateful. I suppose some rest wouldn't hurt, I said. Inside, the calculations were already running. I said I would go on vacation, but I had no intention of leaving Charleston. The morning of my departure, Gavin walked me to the car with a level of relief he tried to disguise as concern. He carried my suitcase himself. He adjusted my scarf as though performing for an audience that wasn't there. "Call when you land?" he said. "I will," I replied. The car turned the corner at the end of Trad Street. I waited until the house disappeared from view before leaning forward and placing my hand on the driver's shoulder. "Turn around," I said, sliding a thick fold of cash into his palm. "Take me to King Street instead." Within 30 minutes, I was standing in front of a narrow brick building above a jazz bar I remembered from my younger days. The landlord did not ask questions. The room upstairs was small, dated and faintly scented with bourbon and old wood. From the single grimy window angled just right between two rooftops, I could see the front facade of my house. I drew the curtains halfway and set up the one tool I had never thrown away, a military-grade set of binoculars I'd used during bridge inspections along the coast. I positioned a folding chair beside the window and began to watch. All day, nothing happened. A few unfamiliar cars idled briefly along the curb. A delivery truck arrived mid-afternoon. Gavin came and went twice. Alawan stepped outside to take a call, her face tense but unreadable. If I had been a weaker woman, I might have convinced myself I was paranoid. At 4 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Mrs. Delphine Broussard stood in the hallway when I opened it. 82 years old, spine straight as a ruler, eyes sharper than most judges I've met. She looked past me at the binoculars, then at the view of my house. "I was wondering when you'd decide to look for yourself," she said calmly. I didn't ask how she knew. She stepped inside without invitation and took my hand. Her grip was firm grounding. At midnight, she said quietly, "You will see and understand everything." She reached into her purse and placed a small brass key in my palm. "The back garden gate," she added. "He doesn't know I kept a copy from when your husband had it replaced." My pulse quickened. "There's more," she continued. 3 days ago, I saw Gavin toss a glass vial into your trash. No label, clear." He waited until dark. My throat tightened. "And your dog," she said softly. "He didn't die of old age. He was healthy. He collapsed overnight." The room felt smaller. By 9 o'clock that evening, the quiet street outside my house began to change. A black Mercedes pulled up first, then a silver Porsche, then 2 SUVs I didn't recognize. The front windows of my house blazed with light. Music, low, bass-heavy, spilled into the humid Charleston air. I lifted the binoculars. Men in tailored suits entered laughing. Women in evening dresses followed. My front door swung open and closed repeatedly like the entrance to a private club. This was not a family gathering. At 11:58, I checked my watch. The jazz bar downstairs throbbed faintly beneath my feet. My palms were damp around the brass key Mrs. Delphine had given me. If I was wrong, if this was some elaborate misunderstanding, I would admit it. I would schedule the evaluation. I would sign whatever forms they placed in front of me. I would check myself into a facility and surrender the house to safer hands. But if I was right, I slipped out of the building and crossed the alley, keeping to the shadows. The air was thick and warm against my skin. The music from my home was louder now, pulsing through the brick walls. I reached the rear garden gate and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. I paused, listening. Laughter. The clink of glasses. A cheer that rose and fell like a wave. The clock on my phone flicked to 12 a.m. I stepped inside the garden and moved toward the side window, my heart pounding hard enough to drown out the music. If I was wrong, I would surrender. If I was right, my life as I knew it was already over. The garden gate closed behind me with a soft metallic click that sounded far louder in my ears than it should have. The night air in Charleston was thick and damp, heavy with the scent of jasmine and the faint salt drifting in from the harbor. I moved along the side of the house, slowly pressing myself against the brick I had once paid to restore, counting my breaths, the way I used to count structural loads when something didn't feel right. The music inside was louder now, not the kind of music you play for a quiet dinner. It was pulsing, rhythmic, designed to drown out conversation and encourage risk. I crouched behind the camellia bushes near the side window. From there, I could see into the living room through a narrow opening in the curtains. For a moment, my mind refused to process what my eyes were showing me. My living room, my careful, symmetrical, historically preserved living room, had been stripped of its order. The antique settees were shoved against the walls. The Persian rug I had purchased at auction 20 years ago was half rolled back. In the center of the room stood a long, green felt table, surrounded by men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns, stacks of cash piled in neat towers under bright standing lamps, cards, chips, champagne, a baccarat layout stretched across the table where my coffee table had always sat. On the far side, another table hosted poker players leaning forward with predatory focus. A woman I didn't recognize laughed too loudly as she slid a stack of black chips across the surface. I searched the room for something familiar, something that would anchor me. Instead, my eyes landed on the fireplace. The portrait of my husband, Declan, had hung above that mantel since the year after he passed. It was the only photograph I'd ever enlarged. He was smiling in it, wearing his navy blazer wind, pushing his hair back along the coastline. The frame now lay on the floor against the brick glass, cracked canvas, face down. I felt the first fracture inside my chest. Then I saw Gavin. He wasn't in a suit jacket anymore. He stood on top of one of my dining chairs holding something high in the air. My father's gold pocket watch, a family heirloom that had survived 2 generations, wrapped carefully in velvet inside the safe. Vintage Gavin called out with a grin, rotating it so the light caught the engraving. Original movement. Let's start at 10,000. The crowd responded with raised hands and laughter. He was auctioning my history like yard sale clutter. My throat tightened so sharply I had to grip the brick wall to steady myself. Then I saw her. Alawan stepped into view from the kitchen doorway wearing a short black dress I had never seen before. Her hair was pinned up. Her makeup was heavier than usual. She carried a silver tray lined with crystal flutes moving gracefully between guests. My daughter. Serving drinks in her childhood home while strangers gambled on the hardwood floors she learned to walk across. For a split second, I told myself she had been forced into it, that she had no choice. Then Cambria Vale appeared behind her. Cambria had once organized a fundraising gala for the Historical Preservation Society. She'd shaken my hand in this very room and complimented the structural integrity of the staircase. Now she stepped close to Elowyn, placed a hand at the small of her back, and leaned in to kiss her slowly, deliberately, just steps away from the baccarat table. Elowyn didn't pull away. She smiled. The world tilted. I felt the ground shift beneath my knees, but I forced myself to keep watching. Gavin jumped down from the chair and circled the table, collecting money with fluid confidence. He moved like a man who believed he owned the space. Once she's declared incompetent, he said casually to a man adjusting his cufflinks, the trust dissolves. The house is ours by default. The words sliced through the music. Declared incompetent. Trust dissolves. Ours by default. It was never about sending me to Sedona. It was never about rest. It was about removing my legal standing. If I were declared mentally unfit, a temporary guardian could be appointed. Control of the estate would shift. The structure I had built to protect the property would unravel. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were preparing to erase me. My gaze drifted toward the study doorway, visible from where I crouched. The safe behind the Ravenel Bridge photograph was no longer hidden. The painting had been removed entirely. The safe door hung open, metal, bent outward, the lock destroyed. Papers lay scattered across my desk. Deeds, insurance documents, trust paperwork spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Someone was trying to reassemble in their favor. My chest tightened violently. A sharp pressure radiated into my jaw. The music blurred into a low hum. The edges of my vision darkened. I tried to inhale slowly, but the air wouldn't cooperate. Inside, Gavin laughed as another bid came in for the watch. The crowd clapped. Someone popped a champagne bottle. My father's watch changed hands under the chandelier I had rewired myself. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime. 12 slow, resonant strikes. I felt my body give out before my mind did. The last image that imprinted itself behind my eyelids was Gavin standing tall on my dining chair, grinning beneath the crystal light, holding up what remained of my family's legacy as though it were a trophy. Then the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke to the smell of coffee and lemon oil. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was in my own kitchen. Then I recognized the lace curtains and narrow layout of Mrs. Delphine Broussard's apartment next door. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted metallic. "You scared me," Delphine said quietly from the small table near the window. "I had to drag you through the hedges like a sack of flour." Memory returned in fragments. The casino, the watch, the words incompetent and hours. How long, I asked. 20 minutes before anyone stepped outside for air, she replied. "You were lucky." She reached into a dish on the counter and placed a small clear vial in front of me. No label. The adhesive residue still clung in a faint rectangle where one had been removed. "I found that in your trash 3 nights ago," she said. "He thought no one was watching." My hands trembled again as I picked it up. Arsenic is odorless in small doses, nearly tasteless when dissolved properly. It produces symptoms that mimic age-related decline, fatigue, confusion, weakness, run hands, nausea, dizziness, misplaced objects. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. "I need a blood test," I said. Delphine didn't argue. By mid-morning, I was seated in a private exam room at an independent clinic in Mount Pleasant, miles from anyone Gavin might know. I paid in cash. I asked no questions beyond what was necessary. The doctor returned with the results faster than I expected. "Your arsenic levels are significantly elevated," he said, brow furrowed. "This isn't accidental exposure. This is consistent with repeated ingestion over time." How long, I asked. "Weeks, possibly longer." My stomach tightened. "There's more," he added carefully. "Your kidney function is reduced, around 60% of normal capacity. If exposure continues, you could experience organ failure. Coma is possible within days. I pictured the one-way ticket to Sedona, a dry climate, a quiet place to deteriorate unnoticed. Gavin didn't need me dead in Charleston. He needed me legally diminished. Back at Delphine's apartment, I opened my laptop and accessed my email archives. I searched for my name alongside legal terms. There it was. A request submitted by Gavin Mercer to the Charleston County Probate Court for an emergency evaluation of cognitive competency, filed 3 days before he handed me the ticket. A hearing scheduled within 72 hours. My pulse steadied instead of racing. The engineer in me took over. If the court declared me mentally unfit, a guardian could be appointed. Control over financial decisions would shift. The trust I had structured years ago to protect the property could be contested or dissolved under certain conditions. Gavin wasn't improvising. He had mapped this out. I considered calling the police immediately, but what would I present suspicion? A vial without a label. A blood test without direct evidence tying it to him. No. I needed more. I needed proof that could not be explained away. "I'm going back," I told Delphine. She studied me for a long moment. And I'm going to give them exactly what they want. By late afternoon, I walked through my own front door as though nothing had happened. Gavin stood in the foyer. For a flicker of a second, surprise crossed his face. "I thought your flight left at noon," he said. "I forgot my medication," I replied, letting my voice waver slightly. He recovered quickly, stepping forward with a hand on my elbow. "It's okay. We'll reschedule." That evening, I began my performance. I misplaced objects deliberately. I stared at walls as though searching for memories. I called Elowen by her childhood nickname and asked if she had finished her homework. When I passed Gavin in the hallway, I let my shoulder brush the wall and mumbled apologies. Inside, I was recording everything. Before midnight, I locked myself in my study and sent a coded message to Declan's former attorney, the only man I trusted who still owed our family loyalty. Then I lay in bed and listened to footsteps move through my house. If they wanted a woman losing her mind, I would give them one so convincing they would never suspect she was counting every step. The next morning, I returned to my own house through the front door as if I were an elderly woman who had simply missed her flight. I must have mixed up the departure time, I said lightly when Gavin opened the door. I held up my pill bottle as evidence. Forgot my heart medication. Silly of me. He studied my face, measuring whether I remembered more than I should. I kept my eyes unfocused, letting them drift just slightly past his shoulder. The house smelled wrong. Bleach. Strong enough to sting the back of my throat. Every surface gleamed. The floors shone. The living room furniture had been restored to its original layout as if nothing had happened. No green felt tables, no stacks of cash, no evidence that strangers had walked across the antique rug, but the air felt scrubbed, not clean. I walked slowly toward the study. The Ravenel Bridge photograph had been re-hung on the wall. I reached out as though adjusting it, then lifted it carefully. The safe behind it was destroyed. The lock had been drilled clean through, the door bent outward, empty. The original deed to the property, my father's bonds insurance contracts, copies of the trust documents all gone. My pulse did not quicken. It steadied. I let my hand tremble theatrically and replaced the frame crookedly. For the rest of the morning, I began the quietest war of my life. I retrieved the micro cameras I had ordered years ago for a consulting job involving warehouse theft. They were no larger than screws. I replaced 2 light switch screws in the hallway with camera units. I embedded a recording device inside the hollow frame of Declan's portrait. Another went inside the smoke detector near the staircase. Every device synced to a tablet I hid inside a false panel beneath my bedside drawer. If they were going to erase me, they would be documented doing it. Then I began performing. I stood in the kitchen and spoke aloud to my late husband as though he were beside me. "Declan, have you seen the car keys I asked the empty room?" At lunch, I placed my reading glasses inside the refrigerator on purpose. I shuffled through cabinets and pretended confusion. In the hallway, I deliberately lost control of my bladder while Gavin stood nearby. The look on his face was not sympathy. It was calculation. That night, after I retreated to my bedroom, I opened the tablet and watched. Gavin stood in the study on the phone. "Yes, she's deteriorating," he said calmly. "We need you to sign off tomorrow." There was a pause. "No, increase the dose tonight. I don't want any delays." My hands tightened around the edge of the mattress. A second camera picked up Elowen in the kitchen. Her voice was lower than I remembered. "Just make it quick," she said. "I don't want her to suffer." The words were not hysterical, not panicked, not coerced. They were tired. My daughter was not trapped. She was participating. I leaned back against the headboard and forced myself to breathe evenly. Later that evening, I accessed public property records online. A new filing caught my attention, an application for a $2 million loan using my house as collateral. The signature line bore my name in a shaky imitation, power of attorney attached, release scheduled for the following morning. He intended to drain the equity before the court hearing, before the evaluation, before anyone questioned the circumstances. At 2 a.m, I rose quietly from my bed. The house was silent. I slipped through the side window overlooking the narrow alley and walked 6 blocks to a law office that had once drafted my original estate plan. The attorney, gray-haired and sleepless, let me in through the back entrance. Within an hour, new documents were signed and notarized. The property was transferred into the Holloway Maritime Legacy Trust, an instrument structured years ago but never activated in full. The timestamp on the transfer read 2:47 a.m., immediate effect. No revocation without my direct consent. No power of attorney override. No dissolution based on competency challenges. When I returned home just before dawn, I washed my hands in the kitchen sink and shuffled slowly back to bed. I lay beneath the covers and allowed my body to go limp. By the time Gavin walked into a bank that morning believing he controlled my house, the foundation beneath him had already shifted. I closed my eyes and waited for the tremor. The notary's office smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee. Gavin guided me to the chair as though escorting a fragile patient. "Just answer clearly," he whispered. "It's routine." I let my gaze wander toward the window. The notary asked if I understood the nature of the document in front of me. "I think so," I murmured vaguely. Before the pen reached my hand, Gavin's phone vibrated. He stepped aside to answer. I watched his face drain of color. "What do you mean?" "Declined," he snapped quietly. "Run it again." Silence. His jaw tightened. "It's my property." More silence, then barely audible. What trust? He lowered the phone, slowly staring at nothing. I straightened in my chair. The notary glanced between us. Gavin's composure cracked. He slammed the phone onto the desk. "They're saying the house isn't in your name anymore," he hissed. I folded my hands in my lap and met his eyes without confusion, for the first time in weeks. "It isn't," I said. He stared at me as understanding dawned. "I transferred it early this morning," I continued evenly. "It's protected." His face shifted from shock to fury to something deeper, fear. Outside the office, he called someone. "I need more time," he said. "They'll kill me by noon." The word kill lingered in the air. That evening, the house felt different. Not tense, volatile. Gavin poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to me with a forced smile. "For your nerves." The metallic aftertaste hit instantly. I lifted the glass to my lips but allowed most of it to slide into the cuff of my sleeve unnoticed. Within minutes, I let my body convulse. I fell to the floor, limbs jerking. Gavin did not call 911. He stood over me, breathing hard. "By morning, she'll be legally gone," he muttered. Gone. Not dead. Not alive. Just removed. From the floor, through half-lidded eyes, I watched him dial another number. "Rico," he said. "I need more time." The response must have been harsh because his voice lowered. "There's cash in the basement. She keeps it down there. You can take it." There was no basement safe with cash. He was offering me. An hour later, headlights flooded the front windows. Heavy knocks, then pounding. Rico Santoro and 2 men forced their way inside. Gavin gestured toward the staircase. In the basement, he insisted. I let my body go limp as they dragged me down the steps. Alawan followed, pale and shaking. In the dim light of the basement, Gavin pulled a knife from the workbench. "Where is it?" Rico demanded. Gavin shoved Alawan toward the wall and pointed the blade in my direction. "Ask her," he said. My hand slipped into my coat pocket. I pressed the trigger on the pepper spray and released a sharp burst toward Gavin's face. He screamed and stumbled backward. In the chaos, I pulled the heavy steel door shut from the inside and threw the internal lock. The men pounded on the metal from the other side. I crossed the room and pressed the hidden emergency switch I had installed years ago after a break-in scare. The signal went directly to the Charleston County Sheriff's private response line. Then I opened the tablet I had concealed beneath a crate. Every camera in the house went live. With one command, the footage began streaming to a public platform under an account I had prepared days earlier. The pounding grew louder. I heard Rico shout orders. I heard the unmistakable click of a firearm being chambered. Alawan sobbed in the corner. I stood in the center of the basement tablet in my hands, watching the live feed as viewers began joining in real time. This was no longer a private family collapse. This was evidence. This was exposure. The steel door rattled violently under the force of repeated blows. Above us, glass shattered. Sirens began faintly in the distance. I felt no tremor in my hands anymore. From this point forward, there would be no return to the role of mother trying to salvage what was left. There would only be survival. And I was ready. The steel door trembled under another violent blow. From the tablet in my hands, I watched every angle of my house at once. The hallway camera showed Rico Santoro pacing with controlled fury, his two men fanning out behind him. The living room camera captured shattered glass and overturned chairs. The study camera showed Gavin wiping his eyes, still blinded from the pepper spray rage, contorting his face. I tapped the screen and routed every feed into the live broadcast. Within seconds, viewer numbers began climbing. Delphine had done exactly what I hoped she would. She had forwarded the link to the Neighborhood Association to the Preservation Board to anyone who had ever attended a holiday gathering at my home. Comments began flashing across the lower edge of the stream. "Call the police. Is that Gavin? What is happening in that house?" Upstairs, Gavin stopped pacing. He glanced toward the hallway ceiling, scanning for something. His gaze landed on the smoke detector. He stepped onto a chair and tore it down. Too late. The feed continued uninterrupted. When Rico demanded to know where the cash was, Gavin did not hesitate. He pointed toward the basement door and insisted there was a stash hidden behind old construction materials. His voice was steady, not surprised, not frightened. He had expected them. He had prepared for this moment in case the bank failed him. This was not desperation born in panic. It was contingency. The pounding on the basement door intensified. I could hear the whine of a power tool as someone attempted to cut through the steel. Elowen slid down the wall beside me, her breathing shallow. "I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered, tears streaking her mascara. "I thought he just wanted the house." I kept my eyes on the screen. "He wants control," I said quietly. "He always has." Above us, wood splintered. The feed from the hallway camera shook as the men forced their way toward the stairs. Then I heard Gavin's voice again, louder this time. "If there's no money," he shouted at Rico, "we can make it look like a robbery gone wrong. She's already unstable." My pulse slowed instead of racing. There it was. He was offering them my death as a solution. Rico paused. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could see the calculation in his eyes. He had come for repayment, not murder charges. He did not look eager to escalate beyond money. The emergency alarm I had installed years ago transmitted silently. I had no siren to warn them, only a direct signal to the Charleston County Sheriff's private response system. The location pinged automatically. Minutes stretched. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard sirens in the distance. Gavin heard them too. He spun toward the front windows, panic overtaking fury. "That old woman," he muttered. What did she do? His phone buzzed repeatedly. Someone must have texted him the link to the live stream. He opened it. His own face stared back at him from the screen. The realization hit him visibly. His actions were no longer contained within four walls. They were public. The pounding on the basement door stopped abruptly. Instead, footsteps rushed down the staircase. The steel door shuddered open from the outside. Rico had forced the upper lock. Light flooded into the basement. Gavin stood in the doorway, knife in hand. Behind him, Rico lingered, tense and wary. Sirens grew louder. In a sudden, frantic motion, Gavin grabbed Elowen by the arm and yanked her upward. He pressed the knife against her throat. "This is your fault," he screamed at me. "You did this. You destroyed this family." For the first time in weeks, Elowen's eyes cleared. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me. There was no confusion in her expression now, no denial, only recognition. I stepped forward slowly, raising both hands. "You're on camera," I said evenly. "Everything you've said tonight is recorded. It's backed up off-site. Killing her won't erase it." His grip tightened. "You set me up," he spat. "No," I replied. "You built this yourself." The basement window, small, narrow, near the ceiling, exploded inward with a sharp crack. A red laser dot flickered across the concrete wall. Rico dropped his weapon first. Sniper, one of his men, muttered. Through the broken glass, I could see the faint outline of tactical gear silhouetted against flashing blue lights outside. "Elowen," I said softly. "Drop." She reacted instantly, collapsing downward. The shot came in the same breath. Gavin jerked backward, the knife clattering across the floor. He clutched his shoulder, blood spreading across his sleeve as he screamed. Rico and his men raised their hands immediately. Within seconds, officers flooded the basement, weapons, drawn commands sharp and precise. Gavin was forced face down onto the concrete. Metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. The tablet was still streaming. Police lights flashed across the basement walls in alternating waves of red and blue. Gavin twisted his head toward me as they pulled him upright. "You trapped me," he shouted hoarsely. "You wanted this." I said nothing. Alawan knelt on the floor, shaking, whispering apologies I did not acknowledge. As Gavin was led past me, blood staining his shirt, I understood that the violence had ended, but the reckoning had only begun. The next battleground would not be in my basement. It would be in a courtroom. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale air. I handed over the memory cards first, then the tablet, then a hard drive containing every archived clip from the previous weeks. The detectives listened in silence as the recordings played Gavin instructing the doctor to increase the dose, Alawan's quiet agreement, the phone call about staging a robbery. Forensics confirmed what I already knew. The wine I had spilled onto my sleeve contained measurable arsenic. Blood tests documented sustained exposure over time. The toxicology report outlined a clear pattern consistent with gradual poisoning. Gavin attempted to redirect blame almost immediately. "She bought it," he claimed during questioning. "She ordered it." Alawan, pale and hollow-eyed, did not deny knowing about the poisoning. She admitted she had seen the vial. She admitted she stayed silent. She said she was afraid. She said she depended on him financially. The prosecutor did not accept fear as an excuse for complicity. The case moved swiftly. In court, Gavin's defense argued financial stress, claimed he had been overwhelmed by debt, suggested emotional instability, painted him as a desperate man who made reckless choices. When I took the stand, I did not speak as a grieving mother. I spoke as an engineer. I explained dosage thresholds. I explained cumulative toxicity. I outlined the timeline of exposure relative to my symptoms. I detailed the structural protections within my trust and how they would only dissolve under specific legal triggers. The prosecution introduced additional footage recovered from Gavin's laptop. He had practiced my signature 47 times on a digital tablet. 47. They presented the filing for emergency guardianship dated before my scheduled vacation. The pattern was undeniable. The jury did not deliberate long. Gavin Mercer was convicted of attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of financial exploitation. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Alawan received a substantial prison sentence for her role in the conspiracy and concealment of a felony. Before sentencing, the court asked whether I wished to offer leniency on her behalf. I declined. "I love my daughter," I said carefully, "but love does not erase accountability. Her choices placed my life in danger." After the trial, the house on Trad Street felt cavernous, empty. I walked through each room one final time, running my fingers along the banister Declan once polished. I stood before the repaired fireplace where his portrait now hung once more, glass replaced. Then I listed the property. The sale closed 3 months later. The proceeds remained within the Holloway Maritime Legacy Trust. I allocated a portion to establish a scholarship in Declan's name for young women pursuing structural engineering degrees along the Carolina coast. I kept what I needed. I purchased a modest sailboat and docked it at the Charleston Marina. On the morning I prepared to leave, Delphine stood beside me with a small suitcase. "I've never seen Maine," she said matter-of-factly. I laughed softly. We cast off just after sunrise. As the shoreline receded, I did not look back at Trad Street with bitterness. A structure can serve its purpose and still reach the end of its functional life. I once believed family was the strongest foundation a person could stand on. Now I understand foundations must be inspected regularly, no matter whose name is etched into them. The wind filled the sails. The harbor opened before me. I was not the woman who had collapsed behind camellia bushes at midnight. I was the one who redesigned her own survival. and for the first time in months, my hands were steady. Tonight's story leaves us with something quiet but lasting. We often think strength looks loud, dramatic, even explosive. But sometimes, strength is simply staying clear-minded when everything around us tries to distort the truth. Sometimes it is choosing dignity over revenge and boundaries over bitterness. What we witnessed wasn't just betrayal. It was a reminder that even the deepest wounds can coexist with grace, and that protecting one's life is not cruelty, it is clarity. As we sit with this, perhaps we can ask ourselves what trust really means and how we guard it without losing compassion. Family can be a foundation, but foundations must be inspected, repaired, and sometimes rebuilt, not with anger, but with wisdom, not with shame, but with courage. If this story resonated in any way, consider subscribing to become part of this space where we listen, reflect, and share. And if you feel comfortable, you can leave a few lines in the comments where you're listening from or what stayed with you tonight. It's always meaningful to see how far these stories travel. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself and we'll meet again soon.